let's get into the giant mailbag.
What crazy thing did City do this week?
It's time for Mattress Running the Numbers. Ready for the main event?
The main event.
Frequent Miler on the air starts now. Today's main event, Sweetspots Realized. You know, we write and talk all the time about award sweet spots where you can get incredible deals for very few points, very few miles. But recently, we've had some opportunity to actually execute a number of those sweet spots.
Right. We've been digging into dessert left and right here. We're full of sweetness this week.
That's absolutely true in more ways than one. And so we're gonna go over some of those great sweet spots and talk about what we did to actually take advantage of them and why they're so good, or if we found out they're not so good in some cases, that might come up too. So we'll get into that right after Giant Mailbag. Today's Giant Mail comes from me. I have mail for the nice ANA agent who messed up an earlier booking I made for my Round the World award. See, here's the story. I had wanted really badly to go to Norway to see the fjords. I wanted to go on a fjord trip as part of this round the world adventure, but I just couldn't make it work with award availability and with the requirement of my ANA round the world award. I could only fly 14,000 miles. So I had to have pretty direct routings and everything.
Right.
Couldn't make it work. So I'd picked a whole nother plan that didn't involve that.
Sorry about that.
And as we've talked about on our previous show, ANA kind of messed up the booking, and the awards that I had thought I had booked to go to southern Spain and across the Strait of Gibraltar, all of that no longer available. So I had to come up with plan B. And when I looked for what was available for plan B, wouldn't you know it, I could easily get to Bergen, Norway, and I could easily get back to North America, which is my next stop, and for two people, which is what I've been doing, two people all around the world. And so ANA, thank you. You made my dreams come true.
And if you've seen the pictures, if you were on Instagram and you've seen the pictures from Bergen, then you know why Greg is so excited about that mess up, because my goodness, those pictures were stunning between Bergen and the fjords. Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, Bergen is what really surprised me. I expected the fjords to be absolutely stunning, and they were. I mean, no question. It's worth going way out of your way to see them. Absolutely. What surprised me is I didn't really know much about Bergen, and Bergen itself is stunning and has so much going on. So I just totally fell in love with that city, and I'm already talking to my wife about going back. She didn't get to come on this trip, so got to bring her back for that.
Yeah, well, and I think that there obviously are some people who were put off by the pace of our trips, right? That we went to these places very quickly, at least a few people anyway, that said, I wouldn't want to go all the way here or there and only stay for one night or two nights, which I totally get. That, obviously most people take a vacation and go somewhere for a while. But the nice thing about this trip was that you could check out a place like that for a day or two and then say, okay, you know what, now we're going to plan a trip back there because that's the place that stands out.
Yeah. Exactly.
Very
so,
cool.
I guess we should mention that why we were traveling.
Right. Yeah. Let's back up and give a little bit of background. So if you haven't been listening, why not? But if you haven't been listening,
well, they're new. They're new to the show.
Welcome into the fold. Welcome into the fold. So we've been traveling this last week and a half. We've alluded to that a few times already in the last couple of minutes, because we were working on our 3 cards, 3 continents challenge, which we do an annual challenge here at Frequent Miler in normal times anyway, where we try to find some way to find some new stuff and test out some of this theoretical stuff we write about. So this time around, what we did is each one of us took 3 new credit card sign-up bonuses. So the points from 3 bonuses from opening cards and $1,000, and planned the most incredible trip we could to at least 3 continents, with that budget covering all the travel, all the flights, all the hotels, etc., all the annual fees on the cards. And at least in my case, I flew almost entirely in business class, but not quite. I'm sure Greg probably has been entirely in business class and stayed at some nice places along the way. So it's been an exciting couple of weeks. I don't know. Stephen Pepper went a number of places. You obviously could talk about what you did. I went to Egypt and Turkey and Oman and Singapore and Thailand and the Philippines and Dubai and sort of Budapest for a night, and then northern Finland before coming home. So all of that in just over a week and a half. The border person was a little surprised when I came back in.
Yeah. And I went 2 people. I brought along the Maisie, the culinary concierge. And we went to Vietnam. We went to Doha. We went to Sofia, Bulgaria. We went to Istanbul. We went to Stockholm. We went to Bergen. And while we're recording this, I still have one more stop to go.
I can't wait to see what it is.
I'm excited about this last stop, but by the time you listen, I'll be done. And so you can check out our website and our Instagram feed and see where I was for my last stop.
Right. Yeah. So excited. It's been an exciting couple of weeks here. Lots of great Instagram content. If you haven't been following us on Instagram, it's not necessarily too late. You can hop on Instagram because we've got reels for a bunch of the stuff we did. And then also there's a little highlight right underneath our logo. There's highlight reels for each of us that show what we did. So if you're curious about seeing some of this stuff and what it's like, because we're going to talk about some of this stuff. And if you're like, wow, I wonder what that looks like, or, what it sounds like, or whatever else, you can go and check out those reels and stories to, get a better sense for the places and things that we're talking about. Now, I know that we were going to skip over what crazy thing this week, but I realized that I made a promise because I mentioned in passing that if you wanted to hear this story, you'd have to listen to the podcast this weekend. So I'm going to give a very short what crazy thing. What crazy thing did Nick do this week? The crazy thing, if you picked up on this in a post I wrote this week, is in Doha. When I arrived in Doha during this trip, which we'll talk more about trips in a few minutes here, but when I arrived in Doha, I went through security because that's what you do when you arrive from an international flight. They put you through security again, and of course it's an expedited security when you're flying in a premium cabin, so a very short line. But when I was grabbing my stuff, they went to swab one of my bags, and I grabbed a little too much. I grabbed somebody else's cell phone out of one of the bins, and I didn't realize until I had already taken the train to the next, main terminal area, and I'm coming down the escalator on my way to the lounge, and I realize, oh my goodness, I have a phone in my pocket that's not mine. So I immediately feel bad for whoever's phone I took, but also feel like, oh my goodness, I look like a thief, right? I have somebody else's phone in the airport. So not the ideal situation. Brought it right immediately to the first info desk I saw, and they seemed a little confused, but I explained, it was just an accident. I picked up the wrong thing. They took my passport and my boarding pass and recorded my details and took the phone and sent me off to the lounge. Said, okay, we're all set. So I'm off in the lounge for a while there, and somebody comes up actually and asks me where I'm flying to. They say, you're flying to Beirut? And I said, no, Dubai. And they walk away. And then like 2 minutes later, another person comes around and holds out his hand and introduces himself. And so I was a little, confused until I realized he had an airport police uniform on. And then I was like, what's going on? He started asking me questions about a phone that I picked up. And so I explained, that, it was a mistake, blah, blah, blah. And he said, okay, well, the other person's not trying to press charges, but we may need you both to sign something explaining that it was just an accident. I said, okay, fine. And so the airport police left, and I figured they would come back, and eventually they did, but then they asked me to come with them. So they took me, started to take me out of the lounge, and it was a couple of police officers and a couple other people at this point. And it became clear to me that he thought I still had the phone and that I didn't realize I had turned it in. Had no knowledge of that. He thought we were going to go so I could turn it into lost and found with him. And he seemed a little annoyed because the other passenger was already on their plane, blah, blah, blah. And so I explained, no, I handed it in. And so he brought me out to the information desk. And so now there's like 6 or 7 people and me, and we're at the info desk, and the info desk doesn't have the phone. And so I'm like, what do I even do? How do I prove this? And there must be a camera, right? But eventually they called around and figured out that the info desk had already turned it into lost and found. Turned out to be okay. All's well that ends well. The police profusely apologized, said it was embarrassing that they didn't realize they already had it, and sent me on my way. So it all worked out fine. But there was definitely a few minutes where I was like, what's going to happen here? They tell me they don't have the phone. And,
Yeah.
it was a little weird for a few minutes, but, we got through it. It was okay.
A little fun adventure in the middle to keep you on your toes.
Well, the worst part of that was that, okay, so like, I think I'm done at this point. He's like, yeah, okay, you can go back to the lounge. And like, this is already the second time the police have talked to me. So I'm a little like, are we done? Are we sure we're done? Kind of a thing. But okay, I go to the lounge, I get a room, I take a nap. And then I come back and I'm sitting down eating or something. And somebody comes up to me to ask me where I'm flying to. And I'm like, oh, no,
not again.
Last time somebody asked me that, police came and took me away. So luckily that time, nothing else happened. So I don't know. But yeah,
they just were curious.
I guess they were just curious where I was going.
A random sleeping person.
Right. Well, I mean, I was awake and eating at that point. So I was like, what now? What now? I already slept my 6 hours. Anyway.
Yeah.
So don't
maybe
do that.
In that first class lounge, maybe they need to know where you're going so they can be sure to let you know if your flight is ready.
I suppose so. Maybe that's what it is. But at any rate, don't pick up somebody else's phone when you go through security. That's my tip. All right.
Oh, that's a great safety tip. So, all right. Well, that concludes today's show. And
No. That just brings us to the main event.
The main event. Today's main event, Sweet Spots Realized. We're going to go over some of the sweet spots we realized on the 3 Cards, 3 Continents trip. We're going to start with Nick, who took the Aeroplan award chart to greatest lengths. You stretched it beyond what it was intended to do, I think.
Well, maybe, although, it's funny because you say that, and I think Aeroplan is pretty well aware of how awesome their award chart is. I've been impressed with how familiar agents seem with it when I've called, because I called a number of times to try to price out different awards. I booked one, I changed one, etc. And so I'm pretty impressed because, what makes Aeroplan interesting is they've got this award chart with, that has not great prices, but pretty good prices if you want to go a really long distance. And it gets better if you're interested in a stopover, because you can add a stopover for just 5,000 points. And then those two things become better because Aeroplan has so many airline partners. I think it's 40 something. They've got more than any other airline in the world. And you can mix and match. So that enables some really crazy stuff. And in fact, some of the itineraries I considered were even longer than what I did. For instance, my itinerary, I started out in Washington, D.C. I flew to Cairo, Egypt, and I had a 15 or 16 hour layover in Cairo. So I went to see the pyramids and Memphis and Saqqara. And then from there, I flew to Istanbul, Turkey, and I had, again, about a 15-hour layover or so. So I was able to get a hotel for the night and then get up and get on a yacht across the Bosphorus to visit both the European and Asian sides of Istanbul before I had to get back to the airport. And then I flew on from there to Oman, spent a night in Oman because, again, it was about another 16-ish hour layover or something like that. So I spent a night in Oman at the Grand Hyatt there and went snorkeling and was surrounded by whale sharks and sea turtles. It was amazing in just a short time there in Oman. And then from Oman, I continued on to Bangkok, Thailand. And so I had a day where I was able to walk around and see the Grand Palace and some sights, and then continued that evening into Singapore and spent a night in Singapore and got to get some delicious food at a hawker stand there. And then from Singapore on to Cebu, Philippines, which was actually my destination. So that was all a single one-way award and actually no stopover, just long layovers of anywhere between 10 and 20 hours or so in each city, which gave me a chance to do something in each place that was interesting. And in fact, I considered I could have continued on from Bangkok instead of going to Singapore and the Philippines. I could have gone to Australia, and I very seriously considered going to Perth because the Hyatt Regency there is on not Fine Hotels and Resorts, but the Hotel Collection. And so 2 nights there would have been just a little bit more than what would have been covered with my annual prepaid fine hotels and resorts or hotel collection booking with the platinum card. So I considered going on to Australia because I thought that that would be also a pretty interesting story in the sense that, I'd get to visit all those places and get to, like the most far flung continent. I ended up deciding not to do that because I've been to Perth before and I hadn't been to Cebu, Philippines. So that was a big motivator. And then also because I knew that I would need a rental car in Perth because I've been there before. And so everything's so spread out. And I figured that the cost between the car and the gas would start to get to be more than I wanted it to be for a stop that I was less excited about because I've been. But the amazing thing to me is that you can put together something like that. Now, in my case, I paid 105,000 miles one way for all of that, including all those chances to stop in each city, and $66 in taxes. That's it. No additional surcharges or anything. So it was a pretty amazing price, I thought, for all of that flying. And then you could add a stopover for 5,000 miles. Now, unfortunately, they did increase the redemption rate on that a little bit on September 1st. So now it would be 115,000 miles one way to replicate that. But still, that's a pretty incredible value when you consider that I flew Egypt Air business class. I flew Turkish Airlines business class. I flew Oman Air on their 787 business class. I flew Gulf Air on their 787 business class. I flew Singapore Airlines on 737 MAX in a flatbed throne seat. I mean, pretty incredible for.
So would you agree? I think the key to really stretching the type of award you're talking about is that your travel goes beyond the distance of their award chart, basically, right?
Yes. Okay.
Because they have bands of distances. As you go further distance, the award price increases, but once you get over a certain distance, it stops increasing because that's just the top of the award chart or the bottom, depending on which way you look at it.
Yes, that's absolutely the sweet spot, I think. In any of the regions, it's when you get beyond the maximum distance. So Greg is totally right. Aeroplan has a really weird award chart. If you're not used to award charts, or even if you are used to award charts, it's the most unique one because they have an award chart between two zones. And so between, for instance, North America and the Pacific zone, which is where I was ending up at the end of my award. And then they determine the number of miles based on the distance, total distance flown on your way there. Now, I could have gone, because I was going to the Pacific, I could have gone westward and gone through California and out to Asia that way. Instead, I went eastward because I knew that, like Greg said, the best value would be exceeding the maximum distance band on that award chart because I'd get as much flying as I wanted and the chance to be able to plan those long layovers, which is again a big advantage. A lot of programs will allow you up to a 24-hour layover without paying additional miles. But the thing with Air Canada is because they have so many partners, it's really easy to find ways to stretch that. Whereas with other airlines, the flights match up, right? I mean, if you fly United to Germany, there's a number of connections probably that are much shorter, whereas or there may not be as long a connection option because the flights are planned out in order to feed those local flights. Whereas with these totally mismatched airlines, you can really connect some long layovers, and I think that makes the Aeroplan program more interesting.
No, I mean, I was totally jealous because I was working with an ANA Star Alliance Around the World award where I could only book Star Alliance for the flights within that award, and I would have loved to. There were certain things I wanted to do around the Middle East, and there are just no Star Alliance carriers that hop around the Middle East. So I was just, had to just take out that those ideas basically. And I mean, I could have used other miles to do that, but it just wasn't practical within the budget constraints.
Well, the other nice thing about Aeroplan is that there are no surcharges. So you don't have to worry about avoiding any particular airlines. Whereas with ANA, of course, you're going to have to avoid some airlines that charge high surcharges.
Right. That's another thing. I had to avoid a number of airlines just because I wouldn't have been able to afford it with the cash part of my budget. So do you know how many miles you flew total on that ANA ticket?
I did. It was... No, I can't remember now. I had looked into some. So the longest one I think I looked at on ANA was about 14,000 miles flown. This one was over the 11,000 was the upper band, right? So it was more than that. I want to say maybe it was 12,500, 13,000, something. It wasn't the longest that I looked at, but it was, a decent number of miles anyway, quite a distance. Altogether on my trip, I think I did enough miles to have circumnavigated the world in the middle part anyway, between all of my flights together, but that wasn't, of course, I booked just my way out with Aeroplan.
Right.
The way back was booked differently.
Right. All right. So that's Aeroplan. Next one we'll talk about is ANA Around the World Awards. We've talked about it a million times on the show, that ANA, which is a transfer partner from American Express Membership Rewards. You can transfer your points from Amex to ANA one-to-one. And they have this distance-based round the world award chart where the more miles you travel around the world, the more the award costs. But what's so amazing about it is how cheap it turns out to be. So a very reasonable itinerary where you could go lots of places would cost maybe 125,000 or 145,000 ANA miles to go around the world. When you compare that to most airlines would charge more than that, or at least that much, to just fly business. Oh, and that's business class, what I was talking about, around the world in business class. Most airlines would charge about that just to, fly from East Coast US to Europe and back for that much or more.
Right.
Or
I paid almost that much one way to Asia, right? You can get around the world theoretically for just a little bit more.
Right. So that's what I used to go for most of my trip. And one of the things that intrigued me was the idea of doing it entirely with one credit card sign-up bonus. And I knew I wouldn't have the 150K bonus because of how we did the card draft. So the question was, could I actually book an around the world award for 105,000 or fewer points, which were my options for doing it all in one go? And as it turned out, I had picked the gold card with the 90,000 point offer. And so then my goal was, can I do this with 90,000 points? So the ANA Around the World Award chart says you can go a distance of 14,000 miles flown on Star Alliance carriers in business class for 90,000 points on the dot. I had done some pre-work before the card draft and believed it could be done, but it was still a little unsure. And just to see, to get an idea why I was unsure about this,
Yeah, this is impressive. I really, this is the thing that impressed me most about your trip. So please explain why.
Yeah, well, there's a few reasons why it's hard to believe that it can be done. One is that the circumference of the Earth, if you were to go along the equator, is about 25,000 miles. So we're talking about doing, that I'm constrained to just a little over half of that in total miles flown and to book an around the world award. But I knew, from the get-go that you could do things like depart from the far west coast of the United States and return to the far east coast of the United States, and they wouldn't count the middle parts. I also knew that even though they have some rules about which continents you touch in your flights, that it's possible to leave a sort of an open segment, an unflown segment, and they don't count that towards the award. So to make it concrete, what I did was I flew the Round the World Award from San Francisco to Saigon, Vietnam, via Tokyo, and didn't have anything going on between there and Sofia, Bulgaria. So the whole distance from there to Sofia, Bulgaria.
From Vietnam, that is from Vietnam to Sofia.
Yes.
That you had to do on your own.
I booked separately with a different program. And so ANA didn't count that as miles flown. And so then I was able to piece together the rest of it under 14,000 and really barely. I mean, I'm within, 50 or 100 miles by the time I'm all said and done.
I'm sure.
So
I'm sure I've been sitting here doing the math, trying to figure it out. Okay, where's he going to go? Which route is he going to take?
Yeah.
Blah,
It
blah,
was kind of, I
blah.
mean, it's
So,
kind of fun, right? It's a puzzle, like,
yeah.
you know, knowing where Star Alliance airlines fly, which ones you can't do because they have too big of fuel surcharges, and finding award availability, and then tying in other things like I had picked a credit card that had 5 Marriott free nights. So I better stay in some places that have Marriotts available, or else, what am I going to do? So those are all the kinds of constraints. And then I did it for 2 people. So I wouldn't recommend that the average person try to take advantage of this round the world award for 90,000 points, right? Like that's a ridiculous constraint.
Not the way that you did.
Right. It's just
that restraint,
it's a constraint you don't really need to take on. I mean, just by bumping it up to about 125,000 points, you can literally go around the world, and it'd be just much easier to book, and you could pay a little more, and you can even have some, like, not go in a straight line. So you might be able to go to Australia, or you might be able to go to South Africa and things like that for a bit more. And especially when there's these 150K Amex Platinum card offers still floating around, a couple could sign up for one of those cards, make one of the 2 people an authorized user on the other, so that after 90 days, the points can all transfer to one person's ANA account, book the 2 people. And I was pleasantly surprised that, despite I had a number of issues, but that had to do with a lot of weirdnesses of the competition, I think, more than ANA. I was surprised at how easy it was to book straightforward things,
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. That's really good to hear, because you do have to book these over the phone. So that could be
a downside,
an intimidation point for some people, that you have to call and talk to an agent. But the agents were pretty good, it sounds like.
The agents were great, and they were so friendly and helpful. And and just as I said, some of the problems I had just had to do with very unnatural constraints of this competition. If I was doing a real, let's say 6-week round the world trip, and the agent said, I'm sorry, there's no longer availability on Monday, can you fly Tuesday? I'd be like, sure. In the real world, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. In this competition, it just wouldn't work at all. So
yeah. So the competition's fun because we set these parameters and say, okay, well, you have to work within these parameters. And so that forces creativity and forces us to find ways to solve problems. And so Greg had no problem adapting from going to Spain to going to Bergen or something like that, which I think makes for something more interesting. But at the same time, when it comes to applying it to your life, like Greg said, use a few more miles and have a little bit more flexibility, and you'll be great.
Yeah. And I need to mention one of the big advantages. We talked earlier about advantages of Aeroplan, Air Canada Aeroplan awards. But one of the big advantages here is that you really could stop and take your time at each of the stops. I mean, you could spend days. You don't have to keep your stop to under 24 hours and do, maybe pay extra for a stopover like Air Canada would charge. You can just do up to, I think it's 8 or 9, I forget exactly how many, full-on stopovers, and so you could really, just use that many points and build really, really a dream round the world business class trip. So great. We always said it was a great deal. Now I've done it, and I still believe it's a smoking great deal.
So which carriers have you flown at this point?
I've flown United twice, and I've been pleasantly surprised by. I didn't expect much from United, and honestly, I wasn't like blown away by United, but it was very good, and the seats were more comfortable than I expected. They have these great little memory foam pillows, like an extra pillow that I really like. You could either use it to support your back or, whatever you need it for. And so there's little extras there. I flew them. I flew ANA business class. I flew Turkish twice, and Turkish is great. If you're flying around Europe, most carriers, even in business class, will give you basically an economy seat and we'll usually just block the middle seats. So if you're flying with someone else, one person will be on the window and one on the aisle. And other than that, they don't really do anything special for business class passengers.
Right.
You get better baggage. If you're checking bags, you get more free checks bags and things like that. And you might get, an extra snack box or something. But Turkish is a whole nother level. I mean, their business class, it blew me away. From Sofia, Bulgaria to Istanbul, the flight was 1 hour. And we were in these luxurious business class seats. I mean, really nice seats. And they brought out the full big catering that you'd expect on an international, 8-hour flight. I mean, they brought out the menus first. They poured champagne and all of that. They brought out a sort of starter course. And then they followed with whatever we ordered, and both the sort of main and a meze array and everything, and it was all delicious. This was a 1 hour flight. So
it's amazing. It's amazing. I can't get a pack of peanuts on Southwest these days.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've taken a 1 hour flight and they've been like, no, we can't do drink service because it's going to be bumpy today. And of course it wasn't bumpy at all. And in an hour you get a full meal. It's insane.
So we're talking about Sweet Spot awards, but I feel like Turkish has to be praised as being sort of a sweet spot carrier for European flights. There are other carriers that do similar things in other parts of the world, but for flights within Europe, I don't think you could beat Turkish.
Well, that's good to know. I think that's interesting because, they're a little bit out of the way if you're flying between two European cities. It's a little bit out of the way usually to fly to Istanbul, but it might be worth going out of your way a little bit for a much more comfortable business class experience than what you'll get on any other European carrier. That's for sure.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And then the only other carrier I've flown so far is Scandinavian. And that was such a short flight. It barely counts. It was from Stockholm to Bergen, which was, well, I guess it was the probably the full hour of the Sofia one, but this was a little tiny plane. It didn't even have a business class, so I can't really fault them for not doing anything there. It wasn't intended to be anything special, and it wasn't, but it was perfectly fine. And for an hour, whatever. And I really liked the airports in Scandinavia. So
I was, it's funny you say that because I was just in Finland and I thought the same thing. It was just very distinct.
Yeah.
The design of everything.
Very distinct designs. There's a lot of wood flooring, which really surprised and pleased me. And anyway, that's been great, but time to move on. We're taking too long on the sweet spots.
True.
Let's try to march through the next ones a little bit quicker. The next one on tap for us to talk about is American Airlines and what you did with that for getting to the Middle East.
Yeah, so American Airlines has a couple of really nice sweet spots in their award chart, but I think a standout value is flying between the Middle East and Asia because they charge just 40,000 miles in business class or 50,000 miles in first class, whether you're going to Asia 1 or Asia 2. They have Asia split into two groups, but the price is the same when you're flying between the Middle East and anywhere in Asia. So that's a great value because you're covering quite long distances there, and because American partners with two pretty glitzy carriers and Qatar Airways and Etihad in the Middle East. So you get a couple of great options. So that already on its own is, I think, a pretty good sweet spot. You can fly from Cairo, Egypt, all the way to, say, Tokyo or wherever else in Asia for 40,000 miles in business class or 50 in first. That's a standout value to begin with. But it can get even a little bit better because Qatar is known for their lounges. I mean, you visited the business class lounge.
It was great
in Doha, and I've been there before. Yeah, it's amazing.
It really is. It's so huge, so big and beautiful. Ceilings like 1 million feet tall, and two different like restaurants basically where you sit down and get menu service. It was really something special.
Yeah. So, and I've been to the business class lounge there once before and thought the same, felt very much the same way. But this time around, what I did was I realized that the flights within the Middle East, many of them, not all of them, but many of their flights within the Middle East are marketed as having a first class cabin, even though they're a 2-cabin plane, much the same as what carriers do in the United States. How, Delta or American, they'll call it first class, even though there's only one forward cabin.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing in the Middle East. So, for instance, you can fly Q Suites between Doha and Dubai. Yes, in a 1-hour flight, you can fly Q Suites, and they market the Q Suites as first class on that short 1-hour flight. But because it's only a 2-cabin plane, you only pay a business class award price. Well, the nice thing there is because they market that as a first class flight, taking one of those short flights gets you access to the first class lounge in Doha. So what I did was I booked an award from Asia to the Middle East, a business class award for 40,000 miles. So I flew from Manila to Doha to Dubai. And I picked that specifically because I knew that the Doha to Dubai leg was marketed as first class, and that would get me access to the first class lounge. And then I planned it out to make sure that I would have a really long layover, that I picked a connecting flight to Dubai that would give me 15 hours in the Qatar Airways first class lounge, because I know that they have good food and they, pour nice champagne, and you get a private room for 6 hours.
Yeah.
We have a bed.
Plus you didn't have free night certificates to spend. So getting a basically a hotel room for free is a great deal.
I thought so, between the flight being an overnight flight, and I knew I would have 6 hours in a room there. Yeah, I thought that would come in really handy, in the sense that it wouldn't cost me anything for a hotel, and I would basically get one. So better than a hotel, really, right? Because the food was all free and the drink was all free. I mean, it was a fantastic little hotel stay, in the sense that I got my 15 hours in the lounge.
Most hotel rooms don't have people coming in to try to arrest you for stealing someone's phone, though.
Well, that's true. That's true. So you want to avoid that part, okay? So then, word to the wise: don't pick up anybody else's phone.
I do want to,
and you'll be just
aside
fine.
from that, I do want to back up just a second and say, even though those flights are marketed as first class, the award price is priced as if it's business class, and that's why Nick was able to do this.
Right. And so that's what I was saying when I said that because it's a 2-cabin plane, you still pay a business class award price. And this trick with getting first class lounge access, actually right now anyway, works in both directions. Generally speaking, you need to be departing in first class in order to get access to the first class lounge. So that's why I booked it Manila to Doha to Dubai, because then I was departing Doha in first class for Dubai. And so that would get me first class lounge access. However, since the pandemic, Qatar has been giving first class lounge access if you arrive in first class as well. So if your award were to start in Dubai and you're flying from Dubai to Asia, let's say, then because you would land in Qatar in first class on that Dubai to Doha leg, you would also get first class lounge access. And again, you'd be paying a business class award price for that. So that's a pretty amazing value. Now, there are lots of other destinations within the Middle East where that happens, though there are some destinations in the Middle East where it's still marketed as business class. So you do kind of have to look at it and see, what does it say? Does it say first or business? Because if it says first, then you're good to go to get yourself first class lounge access. So that was fun. It's a great sweet spot, just for the sense that you get really long flights. You're talking about 8, 9, 10-hour flights potentially to some places in Asia, and what is normally a nice business class. So that's already a standout value. Then if you add this trick on top to get yourself a nice lounge experience, well, all the better.
Yeah. No, that's a great one. All right. So the next one up today is one that unfortunately might not be replicable. As I was doing all my research for my trip, I stumbled upon a award price anomaly, which was that British Airways only wanted to charge me 6,000 Avios, 6,000 points to fly business class on Qatar from Doha to Sofia, Bulgaria. And that's approximately a 5-hour flight. And any other 5-hour flight or even 4-hour flight on Qatar booked with British Airways Avios costs like 4 times as much as that, sometimes more than 4 times as much. And so it was probably a pricing mistake. But I was able to book both myself and Maisie on this route. And in fact, I booked Maisie weeks after I had booked myself. So it wasn't like
Amazing.
one-time short, very short-lived glitch. But right now I can't get it to. It errors out when I try to reproduce it. It's possible that it's bookable over the phone. I mean, because I can't get it to price one way or another. So I think if someone wanted to fly that route, I think it's worth calling British Airways, asking them what's the price to fly this leg individually. Don't try to tack it on to multiple other legs, because like I did try pricing it that way back when this was alive, and it didn't retain that pricing when you combine.
I was curious about that.
So like if I flew from Saigon to Doha to Sofia all on one ticket, it didn't retain the good pricing.
Okay. Well, okay. So that's a bummer. I was hoping that maybe that was the case, but it does make me feel like, okay, well, if you found one,
there might be others.
Somebody said to me just recently in one of my posts, I think they said, when you see one cockroach, there's more.
That's right. I mean, it does seem unlikely, right? That there aren't more things like this. So happy hunting, everybody.
Right. I think so. And I found that really intriguing, because I figured there might be some good opportunities there. I mean, because my goodness, just flying between Doha and Dubai, that would cost you more than that for a business class flight. So all the way to Sofia, hats off to you for a great find on that one. Even if it was only short-lived, we know at least to look for that life elsewhere.
Yes. All right. That brings us to the next sweet spot we want to talk about, which, again, I have to thank ANA's mess up for this one. When I was originally going to go to southern Spain, I didn't have any good uses for my city thank you points for staying at hotels. And even though I had 5 nights or 6 nights, depending on how you want to count it, with my Marriott card, the way I planned the trip, I had 8 nights in hotels. And the switch to go up to Stockholm and Bergen made it possible to use the Nordic Choice Sweet Spot. So even before city thank you points were transferable 1 to 2 to choice privileges, the Nordic Choice properties have been known as a sweet spot in the Choice Privileges program, where you can get some really nice, pretty expensive hotels for very few points. And often they come with free breakfast, and usually they come with free breakfast. Sometimes they also come with free dinner. Anyway, with the ability to transfer city thank you points 1 to 2 to choice, I found in Bergen, we stayed 2 nights in Bergen. I found a great hotel. It cost 12,000 choice points per night. So that so 24,000 total points for the 2 nights, but only 12,000 city thank you points for 2 nights. Great sweet spot. Incredible. I was so glad to finally be able to take advantage of it.
Oh, that's right. And how was the hotel?
The hotel was really nice. It was very quirky. It's like it was very small, but right in the middle of town. I mean, you can't get more in the midst of things than this. And the staff were incredibly nice. Some things I didn't love, like it wouldn't be great for if you're traveling with another person in the same room. I think they didn't have any much place to put stuff. So if you want to unpack and there's 2 people unpacking, you're going to be fighting for the little bit of shelf space that's there.
I see. Well, Nordic Choice properties are such a good value, in part because Scandinavia is really expensive in general. It's an expensive destination to visit. So being able to put your city thank you points to good use for Nordic Choice, I think, is worth shining a light on anytime we get a chance to, because that's a way to save significantly, because any kind of hotel costs quite a bit usually in Scandinavia.
Right. All right. I want to wrap up with one last thing, which is, it's not really a sweet spot. It's sort of build your own sweet spot, which is when there are big transfer bonuses, which the transferable points programs often have these 25%, 30%, even 40% transfer bonuses, where instead of points transferring 1 to 1, they transfer 1 to, let's say, 3, or 1 to 1.3, or 1 to 1.4. And that makes like regular everyday awards a great value. So, I was able to fly. Nick talked about American Airlines. It's only 40,000 miles to fly business class from Asia to the Middle East. Well, I booked with Avios, I booked for 50,000 points from Asia to the Middle East, but it cost me fewer than 40,000 points because there was a 40% transfer bonus when I took advantage of it. That particular transfer bonus is no longer around, so you can't do that, but just watch for the transfer bonuses and look for things like that, because whatever your award plans are, you might not have to worry about, oh, I'm going to find exactly that sweet spot I heard about. You could book almost anything, and it's likely to be a good deal after a transfer bonus like that. So worth keeping an eye out
Very
on
true.
that for that.
Very true. And Aeroplan is the one that I used heavily, obviously, and we just talked about. And there's a 15% transfer bonus right now from Amex membership rewards. So even though they've increased the redemption rate of that option, it would cost you fewer miles than what I paid, fewer points anyway, than what I paid with the bonus right now. You'd pay only 100,000, even though the redemption rate's gone up to 115. You'd pay only 100 for the same award that I booked. Right. So there are definitely opportunities still with all of those, worth keeping your eye out. And when we've written about additional things, when we talked about a few things here, but we've also written about some additional stuff this week at the blog, and there's going to continue to probably be some more in terms of reviews and information about what we did. So keep your eye on the blog, keep your eye on Instagram, because we'll obviously not only finish up this trip there, but our future stuff will surely be better documented on Instagram.
No doubt at all. All right. So for those watching on YouTube, please pardon the weird lighting. I'm actually coming to you from an airport lounge as I wait my next flight in this trip. But
thank you very much for taking the time there to do that. It was nice that we were able to connect on this, because Craig is in a lounge, I'm in a hotel. I both just got back to the US literally from this trip, so it was great that we were both able to connect and do that today. So good stuff. If you've enjoyed what you've been listening to and you'd like to get some of this stuff in your inbox each day, you want to go to frequentmiler.com/subscribe. Again, that's frequentmiler.com/subscribe to get on our email list. You can follow us on all the various social media. Like I said, you should check out our Instagram, because we've certainly been heavily focusing on that for this trip, but you can find us on Twitter. You can join our Frequent Miler Insiders Facebook group. You can find us all over the place. So thank you very much for listening with us today, and we will see you guys all again next week.
Bye, everybody.